Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Madeline and I create knitting content here on YouTube. In today's video, it's not going to be a knitting tutorial or anything like I typically do. It's actually going to be knitting a vintage sweater pattern. So this is something I've wanted to do for quite a long time. And originally I was going to knit this beautiful cable knit cardigan. That was one of my grandmother's patterns. But unfortunately, right now I don't have that pattern with me. So I decided to go online and pick out a different 1940s pattern. And I'm going to go through and knit that pattern. And basically I thought it'd be a lot of fun to tell you all the different ways that patterns are different between then and now. The other tricky thing was figuring out what kind of yarn to use, so I'll go through how I selected my yarn. And yeah, I just thought this would be a lot of fun to kind of compare the two and see how the sweater turned out and how it fit. So if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to leave them down below. If you're new to my channel, don't forget to subscribe. And basically the way I think I'm going to structure this video is I'm just going to show you basically how I picked out which pattern I was going to make. I just went online and I just purchased one of the PDF patterns that you can get. It seems like a lot of people have them for sale on Etsy. I'm sure there are some too on Ravelry. And then I had to match up yarn between that pattern because of course the yarn isn't available anymore. So I just kind of had to research that yarn and figure out how many plies and what weight that yarn was. And then I'll go through like the knitting needle conversions, the gauge swatch, everything like that and how it's different. And then I'll show you the finished sweater. So let's get started. So this is the knitting pattern I selected off of Etsy. And so this one, the actual name of it is down there. So it says the actual name is Coogee, named after the well-loved beach in Sydney. And so on Etsy, for some reason, they name it something else. So it's called the 1940s Beach and Bows Jumper Vintage Knitting Pattern. And so yeah, I chose this one for a couple of reasons. First, I wanted a summer sweater and I like the short sleeves. And then I also thought it looked a lot of fun to add the little bow accents to this one as well. The shop also had really good reviews, so that made me feel better. One downside to these vintage patterns though is that they're only available in one size. So it says this one has a finished size of a 32 to 34 inch bust. If you want to knit a 36-inch bust, you just go up one needle size, so it's not really adjusted or anything for different sizes. There's really only one size, but it worked out that it was my size, so I thought that'd be fine. And basically they just end up emailing you the pattern when you select it. So now I'm going to go through my yarn selection for this pattern. So the first thing I have to do is figure out what type of yarn to use for this project. And I kind of figured that the yarn that they use in the actual pattern will be discontinued, but just to double check, I'm going to look it up on Ravelry. And if it is discontinued, I'm just going to find an equivalent yarn. So I almost got the impression that this pattern was written kind of in collaboration with the yarn because there was a huge ad for the yarn at the bottom. But the yarn is called Sun-glo and it's an Australian yarn. So first I'm just going to look that one up on Ravelry. So here it is. Of course it's discontinued, but basically it's telling me that it's a 4-ply fingering weight yarn and there's 28 grams per skein and it's 100% wool. So I likely won't knit mine out of wool just because I'd prefer this to be a summer top. So I'm going to use something different than wool. And so now I need to figure out how many skeins of this yarn I need to basically make my sweater using an equivalent yarn. So it just says, it doesn't give me a yardage in the pattern, it just says I need 8 skeins to make the short sleeve version. So it looks like one skein is 28 grams. And typically a fingering weight yarn is 100 grams and then there's 400 yards. So basically I'm going to take that 28 grams since there's no yardage amount for how many are on each skein. And I'm going to assume there's about 100 yards on each 28 gram skein. So if I need 8 of them, that means I need about 800 yards of yarn. And of course I'm going to overestimate. So let's say I need at least 900 yards of a fingering weight yarn. So that's basically how I'm going to figure out what yarn I started with, which is this discontinued yarn, and basically just find an equivalent today. So I just took the number of grams and knew it was fingering weight yarn. So now again, I'm going to go try and find about 900 yards of a fingering weight yarn. And again, I'm probably not going to choose wool just because I'd prefer to use like a cotton or something like that just to make it a nice summer sweater. So the yarn I selected arrived today, and this is the one I got. So it's Beautiful You by Lion brand, and I actually just ended up ordering this one off Amazon because it's tricky to go into yarn shops, and it had free shipping, so I just went for it. I'll link this yarn down below though if you're curious about it. And this one is the colorway Sugar Swizzle. Yeah, it came in a 3-pack too, and I was just trying to find a very lightweight white color yarn, and so this one's a little bit cream colored, but I think it'll still look really nice. And now I'm just gonna pick out a ribbon to match this yarn for the top detail. So here's the yarn after I took it out of the package. Each one of these has 326 yards, and I have 3 total, so I have about 1,000 yards to work with here, which I think will be plenty. And it is 100% acrylic yarn. It actually feels very different than most acrylic yarns. It's almost like softer. It's softer and more tightly spun would be how I would describe it. It is a fine weight, and it's machine washable and dryable, so I thought that was a nice plus. I've never tried knitting with this yarn before, but I'll let you know how it goes. So one of the first things I had to figure out in this pattern was the knitting needle size conversions. So in reading through the pattern, let me read you exactly what it says. It says, I need 1 pair of number 12 needles and 1 set of 4 number 10 knitting needles. And so I knew right away that that was not the sizes today, because obviously this pattern calls for fingering weight yarn. So what I did is I just went online and I tried to find a blog or a picture or anything really that would give me knitting needle size conversions. And the blog that I ended up finding this on is called Vintage Stitcherama, and I'll link to them down below. But essentially the conversions I found for the specific knitting needles I have are, when it says a US 12, that's equivalent to a 2.25 millimeter. So that's a US 1 for me. And then a US 10, which is equivalent to a 3 millimeter knitting needle. And then, so for me, that's a US 3. So those are the 2 different sizes I need. And then for the gauge, because I wanted to make sure, I was mainly just going to pick my knitting needle size based off of the gauge. So it just says tension, 7 stitches to 1 inch and 9 rows to 1 inch. And I initially made my gauge swatch. You can see it right here. It's fairly small just because I was afraid I didn't have enough yarn in this pattern. So I knit that on the number 12 knitting needles. So let me check my conversions again. So a US 1 is what I knit this little swatch on. And I was pretty spot on the gauge. So I had about 7 stitches to 1 inch, about 7.5 stitches really, and then 9 rows to 1 inch. So I was almost exactly spot on. So I did just decide to cast on using that needle size, and this is my first ribbing portion. But then when I was reading further on in the pattern, I realized it said change to number 10 knitting needles for the main portion of the body, which is the US 3. So now I'm wondering if maybe my gauge swatch was supposed to be on a US 3. It didn't specifically say. So I'm just gonna keep going with it and hope that I have the right knitting needle size. But yes, so this is the first portion of my sweater, and it's just a little ribbing portion along the bottom. I did notice though in this yarn, if you're curious about this yarn at all, you can see how the twist is, sorry, this is backwards for me. I'm filming this on my computer. The twist is a lot looser in this one strand than it is in the other. Hopefully that shows up all right. See how the one's like kind of unspun and the other one's really tightly spun? So I noticed that, and then there was a break in the yarn right around there, but I feel like it kind of messed up what my stitches looked like, because now I have basically like one row where the yarn was spun really loosely, and then all around it, the really tight spun. But I'm just gonna leave it in there. Let's see if you can, I don't think you can quite see it on camera, so maybe it's fine. But yes, this I knit on my smaller knitting needle size, so now I'm ready to increase. And that's really where I realized that I probably should have knit my gauge swatch on the larger knitting needle size. But oh well, we're gonna keep on going. So I'll come back and give you my next update once I finish that full panel. So I'm definitely filming this one more vlog style, so ignore the background and everything. But what I've done so far is I've actually knit all of the pieces. So now what's left is just to put them together. So starting off with the front and back panels. So essentially you knit the front panel, the back panel, and then you add on this collar around the top. So I think I did just about everything right. The only thing I think I could have done differently were with these decreases around where the collar's added. You can see they pop out a little bit, which isn't necessarily what you want, but that's the way mine is, and I think it's fine. Once I add the ribbon, I think it's all going to blend together. And essentially there's just little holes along where this collar's added, and that's where I'm going to thread the ribbon through. Then along the back, there's the opening, and then I'll add little buttons there eventually. So I think that's a really cute detail. I still haven't seamed the two pieces together up the side yet or anything. Then I have the two sleeves, and I knit them 2 at a time, so they are exactly the same size. And what I thought was really fun about these is that you knit them from the bottom up, and then you basically knit up a little bit further, and then you come back and you seam these 2 diagonals on each side. So you can see basically like on the inside I have these 2 seams. And what it does is it just kind of gives the shoulder some extra dimension. So I'm trying to hold this at the right angle so you can see it on the screen. So you can see it basically turns like a right angle there at the top. And so I think that's a really fun detail. And then, best part, you knit shoulder pads. And I believe these shoulder pads are eventually going to go inside these sleeves somewhere. There aren't too many instructions on how to assemble this, so I'm going to have to just try my best. Maybe I can find some like YouTube video resources on how to position the shoulder pads. Do they go long way or short way? I don't know. I'll figure that one out though when I'm assembling it. But yes, I'm going to be putting the shoulder pads inside of there, and then it's going to add a whole bunch of extra like dimension to the top of the shoulders, and I just think that's so fun. I was not expecting that when I was reading the pattern, and then it was like, cast on for the shoulder pads, and I was like, sure, that sounds fun. So yes, now I have to seam all these things together. And there is also detail along the bottom of the sleeve where you create little holes, so you can also thread the ribbon through there. And so far, I really haven't had much trouble with the pattern. The only thing I will mention is that this one, I think it's more just the way it was scanned in and presented to me rather than user error, but it's because it's from a magazine. So this is just basically snippets of different sections of the magazine, but there's also different sweater patterns included. So like at one point I started reading the wrong sweater pattern, and then I realized it was the wrong sweater pattern, and I figured out which one on the page was actually my sweater pattern that I was knitting. So it was a little bit confusing, but I think that's more just the presentation of the pattern. Obviously, if I had like the original magazine, it would be a little bit easier to read. But I was able to figure it out eventually. I realized pretty quickly because it was giving me instructions for long sleeves and the sweater only short sleeves, so I caught on. The other thing too is that I did have to knit the sleeves shorter. So basically in this beginning part of the sleeves, this little section right here, this was supposed to be a lot longer, about an inch or so longer, but I was afraid I was going to run out of yarn, and I was exactly correct. So I just made them shorter in preparation for running out of yarn. But I'm not too worried about that. And then the one other thing that I mentioned here, I thought I was doing a good thing by not doing a knit two together the last stitch on the row and instead doing like a knit two together, knit one. But really that just made my decreases show more when I added on the collar. It doesn't bother me too much, but that is something that probably wouldn't happen if I had read the pattern exactly as written. So that one's definitely my own error. Yes, now I'm going to keep on going. I'm going to seam it all together, and then I'll come back and I'll show you the finished project. I'm really excited about it. So here's my finished sweater, and I'm sure I'll have already inserted pictures of this on me, where it looks a lot better that way. But just to show you the little details, so the ribbon, it's a little black velvet ribbon that I got just from Joann's, and it's threaded through each one of the sleeves. I think that looks really cute. It's also threaded all the way through the neckline, and then I just sewed these bows. I tied little bows and then just sewed the bows directly onto the ribbon. I only had enough ribbon left over to make 2 of them, so that's why there aren't any on the sleeves. The front just looks basically like the way the pieces did. You can still see that little mistake I did, but I actually don't think it actually stands out that much, so it doesn't bother me. I love the way the shoulders look. I've never actually worn it with the shoulder pads in just because that's too much for me. But yep, I think the shoulders are really cute. Then the back is probably my favorite part. I got these little buttons from Joann's as well, and they're gold and black. And then you basically just make a little cord, you crochet a little cord, and then you just sew the cord right onto the sweater, and then it holds the 3 little buttons. So that's the little back detail. I think that's really cute. And then again, the back looks really similar to the front. And then I did just want to mention real quick in my pictures too, if you're wondering where the shorts are from, these shorts, I thought they looked just like the ones in the original picture. I took off the belt when I took the picture, but these ones are from White House Black Market, and they're really, really comfortable. I'll link these down below if you're curious about them. But just my final thoughts on the sweater. So I didn't really have too much trouble reading the pattern at all. I thought other than the yarn, figuring out what yarn to use, and also doing the knitting needle conversion, it really was pretty straightforward. The thing that I think might be trickier is the fact that all these sweaters are only really available in one size. So if that isn't your size, then you'd have to scale the whole pattern, which could become quite tricky. I also think the sweater pattern probably isn't written for like a beginner or something like that. Just because you have to basically keep track of this whole pattern as you're working up and doing different decreases and things. Like, it's your responsibility to make sure, maybe you can see the pattern better when I zoom in like that. It's basically your responsibility to make sure the pattern's going correctly. And like, it doesn't even tell you to add the pattern to the sleeves, if I remember correctly. Like, you have to figure out how to place it all. So that does make it a bit more of an advanced sweater pattern, but I would still say it's a lot of fun. I'll be sure to link everything that I used down below. If you have any questions or comments, please leave those down below as well. And if you're new to my channel, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.